Bonjour, bienvenue. Mon nom est Benedict R. Au nom du comité organisateur de la 31e édition du Conseil canadien des études de l'Asie du Sud-Est, j'aimerais vous souhaiter à nouveau la bienvenue. It's a real pleasure to welcome you in Montreal. The conference already started yesterday with a pre-conference for senior undergrad and newly graduate students that included an opening presentation by one of our French colleagues, Dr. Jérémy Jem, currently Associate Director of the Institut de Recherche sur l'Asie du Sud-Est contemporain, based in Bangkok. And there were then two panels of students presenting, recently graduate students or finishing third-year undergrad. During the cocktail last night, we, besides eating some Filipino food, the two organizers of the pre-colloquium or the pre-conference, Dr. Gabriel Favreau and Jean-François Bissonnette, recognized the quality and the strength of the 8 papers presented. Following the cocktail, we had the opportunity of seeing the University of Montreal Gamelan Ensemble at work. The Giri Getaton, under the direction of Master Idewa Made Suparta, offered a rich, dynamic, and very original performance of their savoir-faire and interpretation of Balinese music and dances. The Gamelan Ensemble has been on campus for over 25 years and gathers both volunteer musicians, former music students, and currently enrolled students. So if anyone is interested, they can join the ensemble and get 3 credits at the same time. But what is amazing is a common and shared passion for gamelan music and Bali music. So it was a very interesting and wonderful show. Ce matin, le colloque a pris son véritable envol avec une première série de panels. Thank you to those who woke up early. Au cours des 2 prochains jours, c'est près de 120 communications qui seront présentées à travers 29 panels et 3 tables rondes. Nous sommes vraiment heureux d'avoir renouvelé avec une tradition qui, comme nous l'a rappelé hier soir notre collègue Rodolphe de Coninck, un des membres fondateurs du CCEASE, est celle d'avoir de nombreux panels en français. D'ailleurs, il s'agit de la 7e fois où cette conférence a lieu au Québec, et cette fois-ci encore, nous avons une variété de panels en français, en anglais et en bilingue, donc totally Canadian. Signe aussi de la vivacité des études sur la région, une bonne partie des communications sont le fruit et des recherches d'étudiants à la maîtrise et au doctorat. Avec cette nouvelle génération montante, on ne peut que souhaiter que nos universités au Canada suivront et que de nombreux postes pourront être ouverts dans les années à venir sur l'Asie du Sud-Est. Je tiens à remercier les collègues du groupe de l'Asie du Sud, le CCEASE, qui ont aidé au printemps dernier à planifier et valider l'organisation du colloque, jouant ainsi le rôle de comité aviseur. Before introducing our keynote, I'd like to invite my colleague, Professor Frédéric Mérand, Associate Professor in Political Science and Specialist of European Integration, International Relations, and Pierre Bourdieu. As newly appointed Executive Director of University of Montreal International Research Center, he's been highly supportive of our East and Southeast Asian research endeavor, and the CCEASE has contributed or is contributing very generously to this present colloquium. So I'd like to give a chance to Professor Mérand to welcome you as well.
Merci, Dominique. I did try the Filipino food yesterday. I'm really sorry I missed the dance. Au nom du Centre d'études et de recherche internationale de l'Université de Montréal, le CCEASE, je vous souhaite la bienvenue au colloque L'Asie du Sud-Est à la croisée des chemins. Je vais vous confier un secret. Le CCEASE n'existe pas vraiment. En fait, il n'existe que par la 60aine de chercheurs et les 20 unités de recherche en études internationales qui font de l'Université de Montréal un des principaux pôles de recherche en la matière au Canada. De l'Europe à la sécurité internationale en passant par l'Amérique latine, les États-Unis et l'Afrique, ces unités de recherche, qui sont largement autonomes, sont la condition de la vitalité et du rayonnement des études internationales à l'Université de Montréal. Et je n'ai aucune gêne à affirmer qu'avec le CCEASE, dirigé par Dominique R, et la chaire de recherche du Canada en études asiatiques, dirigée par Rodolphe de Coninck, et le CCEASE et d'autres initiatives, le pôle Asie est vraiment le plus dynamique au CCEASE. Today is one of the 3 major academic conferences that are financially supported by the Center for International Studies at Université de Montréal, the so-called CCEASE, this year. The other 2 will be on India and on Franco-Quebec relations later this year. My hope is that each conference will be as impressive as this one, with a professional team of organizers. Dominique, of course, Stéphanie Martel, whose name has been mentioned yesterday, and I've seen it from very close how efficient and wonderfully professional they were. A partnership with a major academic association, the Canadian Council for Southeast Asia Studies, which I'm really glad to welcome here. A bilingual format, more than 100 participants from across Canada, from the United States, and also from Asia. Renowned speakers, such as our keynote this morning, Ben Anderson. The new generation of young academics who participated in the pre-conference workshops yesterday. Scientific, cultural, social activities as well, and a multidisciplinary perspective. Les thèmes d'identité, de démocratisation, d'intégration des marchés, de développement, de sécurité, de migration sont au cœur du programme scientifique du CERIUM. C'est pourquoi je suis très heureux de passer quelques heures avec vous et vous souhaite un excellent colloque.
Now, the real challenge. This morning, I have the immense honor and also the impossible task at the same time to introduce Dr. Benedict Richard O'Gorman Anderson as our keynote. Impossible because its contribution to our appreciation of the region is just gigantic. Ben, as we know him, not necessarily Richard Gorman, Ben, as we know him, has made a significant and lasting imprint on our understanding of Southeast Asia. While his work on nationalism and its emergence has crossed spaces and discipline, and the most famous imagined community, IC for the intime, has become almost a trademark name, while talking about nationalist movement. Repeatedly, it is found on most book indexes, and if you click on Google, I don't know if you have an idea how many results come out. As of this morning, it's 46.5 million results if you click Imagine Community. I haven't checked all of those. It is his original and rich scholarship on Southeast Asia and its contribution to the mentoring of several generations of scholars that I would like to underline today. Parfois décrit comme un érudit, un héritier de Lumière ou encore comme un néo-marxiste culturel de la joyeuse bande des camarades du New Left Review, il n'y a pas d'étiquette ou de raccourci intellectuel qui puisse rendre justice à l'originalité et à l'exhaustivité de sa contribution. Certains ont parlé de lui comme un traducteur du tissu politique, social et culturel de l'Indonésie, de la Thaïlande et des Philippines. On pourrait, j'imagine, dire qu'il s'agit d'un véritable interprète, dans son sens premier. Interprète dans le sens d'expliquer, d'éclaircir le sens d'un texte ou encore d'un exégète contemporain. Ce sont des centaines d'articles produits année après année, plus de 350 publications depuis 1959. It's a cruising speed of 7 articles per year. Une telle production scientifique ne peut que nous rendre humbles, mais aussi nous inspirer. What explains such prolific and original thinking? Well, many have tried to do so. In the specter of studies on his writing is as massive as his own writing. However, I would suggest that similar to what Beethoven is supposed to have said one day, it's 90% work and 10% talent. At the center of his work is a genuine commitment to fieldwork, and I like to emphasize this. Long period of being based and living in Southeast Asia. More importantly, it is an incredible skill and a real pleasure at learning and exploring languages. Such commitment to both fieldwork and learning and understanding languages have enabled him to decipher and make sense of the links and connection between power, culture, language, and literature. Such immersion with a wonderfully sensitive ears, a capacity to listen with ear open and eye wide open, has made him capable, as one Indonesian student once told me, Ben understands us. He can think as we do. When we read him, we read ourselves. Such skill and talent is very rare and admirable. His interest for popular culture, cartoon, movies, leaflet, music, and street culture has also, I believe, played a central role for developing such acumen and sensibility. Walking around Manila or in Quiapo with Ben or in Montreal with Ben is a festive and fun experience, yet never a simple walk, as his question never stopped to surprise you by the incisive and unexpected character, forcing you to question your own assumption and perception. Whether it is about Quiapo in Manila or be about Quebec nationalism, or the amazingly high number of strip club and pawn shop on Sainte-Catherine, one of the Montreal main boulevards. Linked to this notion of work is a rigorous and profound commitment to scholarship. In its most noble sense, a process of building up and constructing knowledge as an iterative and dialogical process with contemporary and fellow specialists. What cannot but amaze oneself is that after a PhD on Java, later published as Java in the Time of Revolution, and being eventually barred from entering Indonesia in the late 60s, early 70s, that did not stop him to continue working on Indonesia, including publication of a seminal article that most of us have read in our grad seminar, or that we make our students read, Old State, New Society, Indonesia, New World Order in Comparative Politics, in '83. The same year that was the Imagine Community came out. But also he went on to learn Thai and soon wrote a seminal article on Thailand, several articles, in fact, on Thailand, including Withdrawal Symptoms and Murder in Progress in Modern Siam. À nouveau, il fera le même saut périlleux alors qu'à partir du milieu des années 80, il s'intéressera aux Philippines. Autre expérience d'apprentissage de la langue, il se mettra au tagalog, mais aussi à l'espagnol, pour explorer et décortiquer en profondeur l'œuvre du génie littéraire philippin José Rizal. Dès 88, il écrira Cacique Democracy in the Philippines, qui reste à ce jour une brillante synthèse et une interprétation mordante de l'histoire politique contemporaine des Philippines, et qui reste encore aujourd'hui d'actualité, alors que le fils de Corazon Cuanco, one of the large established family oligarchy, Pinoy Aquino, is now president. The other Ben, the Ben that we, meaning over 100 PhD that he supervised over the years, this collective heterogeneous body of students that we self-refer as SDOB, Sons and Daughter of Ben, is an exceptional and joyful mentor. It is through working with him that one learned, like an apprentice, what it is to try to be a scholar, but also a mentor for new generation. Taking class with Ben or discussing with him is like playing multiple chess games. You sit on the edge of the chair, and you always have to be ready for having questions unexpected and always challenging coming at you. Jamais de complaisance, mais une profonde intégrité et une ouverture intellectuelle font de cette expérience de mentorat un véritable exercice d'apprenti, où l'on apprend de cette expérience à regarder, à observer la pratique de l'artisan intellectuel que nous tentons d'être. Comme disait une collègue étudiante, aller dans un séminaire de Ben, c'était l'occasion d'attraper un diamant, une idée brillante, une réflexion qui allumerait l'esprit pour des années par la suite. Aujourd'hui, ces multiples générations sont éparpillées un peu partout, dans différents départements et différentes universités. Certaines cohortes, comme The Class of '88, ont marqué déjà le champ des études des Philippines et des études thaïlandaises. When getting together, there's a clear imprint of Ben mentoring. Always keep your eyes and ears open. Try to go beyond the accepted wisdom and question common sense and to try to discover what's under these. Today's keynote will certainly be another occasion to do so, to question accepted wisdom or common sense, with a title called Why Have Monarchies Survived in Southeast Asia? Let me introduce. Welcome, Ben. Thank you.
It's very sweet of Dominique, but it makes me feel I'm on TV somehow. And it's always a bit embarrassing. Anyway, this topic for today is, I decided of various possibilities, I would bring some comedy to this great meeting. And the right topic for comedy is obviously monarchies. In 1952, when King Farouk, very fat guy, and with a zillion wives, was kicked off the Egyptian throne by a nationalist tyrant known as Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he headed off for Monaco or the Riviera for the rest of his life. But On leaving, he is said to have said, and it's quite likely, that by the 21st century, there would, and I got this from a Spanish book, so I have to give it in Spanish, El Cuatro de la Baraja, which means the 4 kings in a pack of cards, i.e. just a pack of cards, and not a card, monarca, let's see, Ingles. So he believed that they'd all be gone except for 4 sort of fake monarchies, and the only real monarchy that would survive into the 21st century would be the United Kingdom, and he was kicked out of Farouk just at the time as Liz II ascended her throne. Well, it turns out that he was too optimistic. We now have still in the League of Nations, United Nations, 27 monarchs of various types. And I thought that it would be, this amounts to about between 12 and 13% of the members of the United Nations is very small. And most of the countries that are monarchies in the United Nations are very small. I wanted just to put you in the right mood. A photograph which I was surprised to find in the Bangkok Post on May 20th, 2012, because it represents the celebration of Elizabeth II's 60th anniversary, I think, on the throne. And you would think it would be embarrassing because the representative of Thailand was a very unpleasant figure, much disliked by almost everybody, appears as the representative on the back row, where you could, fortunately, you could hardly see him. But let me give you an idea of where the comedy lies. If you look along the front row here, you will see on the left a rather pathetic-looking emperor of Japan. Next to him comes Beatrix from Holland, then comes Margrethe from Denmark, and then something quite interesting, there's King Constantine, who doesn't exist anymore, and next to him comes King Michael of Romania, doesn't exist anymore. Then next to the Queen comes the King of Sweden, the Sultan of Brunei, and the billionaire ruler of Liechtenstein. And after that, I think it's, yes, Swaziland, and, is that right? Let me just check. I got this right. Yeah. This is like those photographs in high schools where, you know, the principal has the senior teachers sitting next to him in a row, and then behind become the good kids, the ones who don't make trouble and study well and all that. And there you have, on the second row, you have Prince of Monaco, and next to him you have, let's see, Luxembourg, I think. And then Lesotho in Africa. And there's 2, let's see who's after that guy. It's the disliked King Albert of Belgium and poor old King Harold of Norway. And then the sheikhs of Qatar, the king of Jordan, and the, what is it called in Malaysia? Yang Dipertuan Agong of Malaysia, who looks like a nice man and also rather embarrassed by the situation. Then comes at the back the bad guys, and these are Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, 2 representatives, the non-existent King Alexander of Yugoslavia, also no longer existing. There is the King of Norway, And then we find that tiny little image of the Thai crown prince, and then the elder sister of the king of Morocco. And finally, let's see, a representative of Saudi Arabia, definitely not a king, but they had to fake it up because he was the ambassador to England, and so he showed up to stand for the king in Saudi Arabia. Well, the curious thing is, why should they have these ex-kings brazenly put on in the front row, as it were, when there were no kings in Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia since the early 1940s, and the Greek one, of course, disappeared in the 1970s, early 1970s. Well, the reason is that it's a kind of, what should I say, a sort of magic number. We have to have 27 people here, even if it means dragging in these XXXX people, because 4 people, rulers, had refused to come, and one of them was represented in a very curious way. And the people who didn't come was Bhutan, where the leaders, worried by aggressive activity by the Indians, which they attribute to the past of the British Raj. We don't need that. The Sultan of Oman, and Cambodia, and Spain. And Spain's an interesting case because, I mean, this was just about the time that the King of Spain was being, the scandals, financial scandals and sexual scandals began to come out. But anyway, the official reason was that Whitehall had sent the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth to celebrate this thing in Gibraltar, which is, of course, extremely upsetting for good conservative Spaniards, so I'm not coming if you're going to do that. Now, the other curious thing is, and this is only a guess, but I heard it from other people in London, that Cambodia was not invited because the king is gay. The Sultan of Oman was not invited because he's gay. The king of Morocco is gay. And his sister, who was quite bossy, said to him that you're shameful. You shouldn't go there. People will make fun of you there. I will go in your place. So it's possible that this odd working out of who's to show up is influenced by what the top bureaucrats in the royal palace, etc., were doing. Okay, so you at least see who the, and there isn't a single good-looking person in it, woman or man. So, all right. I should mention one thing that's will come up a bit later, but it's important, which is that after World War, well, more or less after World War II, one kind of monarchy disappeared completely. And that is there were no more emperors or empresses. The British quit calling the Queen with the independence of India. That was not possible. And the Japanese were stuck because when they decided how to translate Tenno, which is their word for the ruler, they wanted to see they were just as good as the British and the Germans and everybody else in the 19th century. So it said, Tenno means emperor. And of course, they were busy making an empire. But today, to have an emperor who has no empire is a kind of ludicrous, and you feel sorry for Akihito for this reason. So there aren't any more really serious emperors, which was understood, really invented by Napoleon as a super king, a king over kings. And there was a huge competition. The Germans had to be emperors, the Japanese, the Russians, Austria-Hungary, Britain, everybody was, and even, I'm glad to say, that soon after Napoleon made himself emperor and forced the Pope to come and kiss his behind on the way, it was immediately copied in Haiti by Dessalines, once Toussaint had been captured and imprisoned in France, and his successor after his assassination, which is Uncle Christophe, also kept the status of emperor. And my favorite emperor actually is a sergeant in the army of the Central African Republic who decided to make a coup d'etat, and after he was successful in the, I think in the 70s or early 80s, he ordered an outfit exactly like Napoleon had for his dress, heavy ermine, white ermine robes, and he had a parade through the city, Bangui, with an orchestra brought from France, which was playing great Mozart music. He was overthrown the next year, which he deserved. Okay. I should also actually, it was tried in the Americas. I mean, Brazil had an emperor, and Mexico tried to have one, but they didn't last very well. Now, I'm going to turn it on to this is, you can have a look at these statistics, give some idea of what's involved. And I should say that some of these statistics are deceiving. The figure, for example, in geography, the figure for Morocco includes a vast part of the Sahara, which was simply attacked by the ghastly father of the present king, notorious Hassan II, when the Spanish area, Spanish domain south of Morocco was divided between Mauritania and Morocco, but actually there's still an active independence movement, and the UN has not okayed this figure. If you're looking at, and to say that this is the total square mileage of all the monarchies in the world, and if you put them all together, it's still definitely and clearly much smaller than good old Oz. That is, all the monarchies put together are still smaller than Australia. Not very impressive in itself. If you turn to the population figures, what you have to recognize that almost all the Arab state figures are gross exaggerations, because they've been importing huge numbers of people from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from Thailand, from Indonesia, from Philippines, and so forth. And Saudi Arabia is the real Saudi population is quite a bit smaller than this. And in the case of the United Arab Emirates, it's something like 80% of the population is alien. So that impressive figure of 8 million is actually probably less than 1 million. So there is some deception in this. And what you notice, of course, is that more than half of the monarchies are smaller in population than the population of Bangkok, which is a sort of medium big city in global terms. And the only really big population monarchy is the Japanese. And if you add up all the numbers of people in the monarchies around the world, they are less than half of the size of the population of India. We're talking half of India or less, half of all of Australia less. So it's not a very, what is really remarkable is the enormous number of very small ones. And that's one of the reasons I think that they survive, is because they are small. The third thing I want to show you is this. These are the 10 richest, according to Forbes, monarchs. And you'll be glad to see that good old Southeast Asia has number 1 and number 2. And way ahead of the Arabs, sorry to say. And also well ahead of the 2 most notorious money laundering monarchies in Europe, that is Liechtenstein and Monaco. So everybody stashes their illegal money. And the 10th one is the Aga Khan, but actually he doesn't have a national state. He's not represented in the UN, so it's a bit dubious that he should be there. Notice that Queen Elizabeth is not there. And what people thought were very rich, people like the ruler of Holland, of Denmark, they can't beat the Arabs, and they can't beat the microstates, and they can't beat good old Southeast Asia. So it's rather fascinating to look at this. I mean, anybody had said in 1900 that the richest king in the world would be a Thai. Nobody would have believed it, including the Thais. But things have happened. Queen Elizabeth isn't there partly because she was forced to pay taxes. Should never happened before, and grumble, grumble, grumble. It's interesting also that the 3 British monarchs which everybody has a good view about in some ways are all women. Elizabeth I, Victoria, and this one. There are no male ones which can stand up against this. So if you're interested in monarchy, try to make sure that your monarch is a woman, not a man. It's much better. Okay, then I'm going to turn to the causes of this rather spurious situation. And I should say I'm not going to say a great deal about the internal politics of the countries in Southeast Asia which have monarchs, because you're mostly quite familiar with this. I'm trying to put these monarchs in Southeast Asia in some kind of, I don't want to say anything as pretentious as a theoretical framework, but at least some kind of external framework. If you look at the distribution on the map, you'll find that the largest concentration of monarchies is in northwestern Europe, stretching, shall we say, from Britain through Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Luxembourg, and so forth and so forth. There's practically nothing in South Europe except for the Spanish one, which may not last very long. That's one group. The second group is the group that really controls the Gulf and the waterways, the Suez Canal, Red Sea, and parts of northeastern Africa, which was very important to the British because it was the place which controlled the traffic to India and further on, but basically to India. And then when oil started to be discovered, then it became even more important. Around 1910, 1915 began. And the last group in Southeast Asia cluster, and again there it's clear that the cluster is situated in a very crucial place in international trade, that is through the Straits of Malacca and on up towards the coast of China, Hong Kong, and ultimately the linkages to New Zealand and Australia and so forth. And Singapore being a crucial place. So if you look at all these three, and I should say that the first cluster is a series of small monarchies which were important to London. They're the ones who created monarchical Holland, which didn't exist before. They're the ones who created, when the Belgians, the British said, you're the same as the Dutch, so you're going to have one king, the Orange King, and just enjoy it. But they rebelled in 1830, and so the British said, okay, you'll have your own king, a Catholic actually. And the importance of these two monarchies, small, weak monarchies, was that they would have to depend on the British, and they were blocks to aggression from the French and from the Prussians, and access to the interior of Europe through the Rhine and other big rivers going there. And also they were very concerned about control of the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, to make sure that the Germans or the Russians didn't move in on them at some point. So they had very close ties to the Scandinavian monarchs who did that. But at that time, they were more afraid of the British than they were of the Germans or the Russians. So basically, all these monarchies were built and created by British, and with the minimum amount of expenditure of colonists, if you like. I mean, the idea was what we know as indirect rule. That is, the rule that London said is, look, you do what we tell you to do in the form of foreign policy. You have to follow our foreign policy, and don't have good ties with any things that we think are your enemies, and our enemies, that's one. Secondly, you cannot shut your door to our capitalist expansionists. And you have to be open to trade inside continental Europe. You have to give us access to your oil when they found it. And in Southeast Asia for a long time, the crucial export of the British was, remember Colombia? The great drug dealer of the 19th century were the British from India. Over half the budgets of Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam were actually 50%, more or less, came from money from drugs. And the Dutch regime in Indonesia too. This was a hugest profit-making operation which lasted for 50, 60 years. So the format of the clusters actually follows the interests in 19th century Britain up to World War I. And there were all kinds of reasons then not to interfere excessively inside these various monarchies. Just keep an eye on them, make sure they don't deal with anybody else, do what we want them to do, and then we don't have to send a lot of officials, we don't have to make trouble. We can use them as a buffer, we can use them as a source of minerals, and, for example, rubber and so forth. And the monarchs are supposed to be able to block popular nationalism, and to a large extent they were for a very long time. So this, actually, if you look at the whole picture of monarchies today, everywhere, practically everywhere, not everywhere, you're looking at what the British left behind. And this didn't end until in the 1970s, when Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of the Labour Party at that time, made a public statement, we no longer have the resources, we no longer have the military power to play the kind of role from London to Australia or London to Beijing anymore. It was a moment of panic for a lot of these small monarchies. It was going to happen to us without this kind of support. But we should also note that, in fact, the British, remember, after World War I, it was very interesting that they made a deal with the French, with the two winning powers, that the Middle East would be put under joint British and French. What is it called? I've forgotten the technical word for this, but anyway, it's definitely not a colony. And the British insisted on creating monarchies in Jordan, which is still there, Iraq, which has disappeared a long time ago in a lot of blood, Egypt, which only became a monarchy officially in the middle of World War I. While the French said, no, we're not going to have a king of Lebanon, we're not going to have a king of Syria, which was given to them, and they took. And here's an interesting moment that, by a curious oddity, when Napoleon III, the big Napoleon, great-nephew, in the early 1850s, up to his collapse in 1870. Curiously enough, this fellow was a big imperialist and wanted to compete with the British, but also he had a lot of admiration for the British methods of creating a empire. And it's under the rule of Napoleon III that you find the creation of the protectorates of North Vietnam, two of them actually, also Laos and Cambodia. These were all technically not colonies. The only colony really was Cochin China. So they thought, well, this is a good way to run it, because the Laotians and Cambodians don't have much to offer really in terms of resources. And if we have the control of Saigon, then, you know, the Vietnamese will go with us. Okay, that's the general picture I want to suggest. That is that when we think seriously about colonialism, one has to sharply distinguish between indirect rule and direct rule. And don't be deceived by things like saying protectorate, or there's various terms, technical legal terms you can use for this. But in fact, for example, in British India, there were actually hundreds of rajas of various sizes, which was fine as far as the empress or the emperor was concerned in London, because there you show how grand you are, because you have all these little obedient, small or big local royalties who could keep control of the population because of their statures and their charisma and so forth. It was fine as far as the British were concerned, as long as these rajas behaved. If they didn't behave, out. No trouble at all. The British also recognized that small states, like, for example, Kuwait or something like that, are very vulnerable and to occupation by somebody else to be obliterated, and therefore they needed a protector. But this is just a different kind of colonization. So that the collaborating class, typically in all these cases, are monarchs, small monarchs or medium-sized monarchs. They have the most reason to collaborate with the British and to a certain extent the French elsewhere. The big shock for the monarchies came in two big waves. The biggest one and the most important one was the collapse of all the great giant empires except one in between 1911 and 1922. that is the Chinese Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The British Empire was the only one which survived. And that's the beginning of the creation, therefore, of a League of Nations, because these gigantic complexes could not be described as national in the normal way. The second blow came with World War II, and the outcome of that, which was the defeat of Hitler and the enormous uprushing of communism in Asia and in Africa and in Europe too. And here a whole string of monarchies disappeared in the Russian zone of Europe, but also places like Afghanistan, places in Africa and so forth, Ethiopia. And many of these things, well, if they were not knocked over by communists, they were even more likely to be knocked over by the new national militaries that were being created, which were dependent on Britain and America for their weapons, their tanks, their planes, whatever it was, unless they scurried to Moscow and tried to get help from there. So I looked up and I thought that actually more kings were kicked out or got rid of in the post-World War II era than were by communism, actually. But anyway, those two forces made the numbers drop extremely rapidly. Okay, finally, I just want to turn to Southeast Asia, because I've been talking in a very abstract, or not abstract, but in a very global way. And I want to sort of situate the four kingdoms within that system. And the easiest one to start with is Brunei, because it's the only, I think it's the only state in the Southeast Asia which doesn't have a parliament, doesn't have a legislature at all. It's the nearest to an absolutist ruler that you can find, thanks to the long cooperation between the Brunei rulers, the sultans, with the Shell Oil Company, and of course protection from the British right up until 1982, when Brunei was actually admitted to the United Nations. The striking thing about the Brunei is that the money from oil is so great that he's perfectly able to basically give everybody in the small country. Let's see, we're talking about 375,000 people. That's all. And he has all these billions to play with, and so he can make everybody feel, well, we're getting subsidized for scholarships to school, we're getting subsidized for this, subsidized from that. There's no sign of any trouble. And it looks very much like a Gulf emirate somehow that floated off across the Indian Ocean and ended up in Borneo. I mean, his reign, his kind of monarchy, is really very close to what Bahrain, Kuwait, and all these other places do. Officially, there's a kind of constitution, but he doesn't have to pay any attention to it. It was just what was necessary to make him acceptable to the UN, and the British give them a pat on the back. We wrote your constitution for you, that's fine. You're going to be safe. And the crucial thing from this is what we learned from the first Iraqi war, when Saddam Hussein occupied or tried to absorb Kuwait into Iraq. And to a man, virtually, all the states in the United Nations joined up, supported the first Bush attack on, because if Kuwait was allowed to be swallowed up in the traditional manner, then the security of all the small states would be enormously enlarged. So everybody supported this. And Brunei has to think also about, very important to be in the UN, because then you're a nation and your boundaries can't be changed. The only problems that possibly face, I mean, eventually the oil will run out. The other problem is the usual problem of monarchies, which is they are clans, and that, you know, brothers and sisters and brothers and fathers and so forth quarrel or are inadequate one for one another. This present guy who says he's now abdicating to one of his sons actually made a sort of quiet coup d'etat against his own father to come to the throne. And the polygamy of Muslims leaders also means that there's constant problems of which mother and which son was really due to become the next sultan. That's the simplest. The second one is also reminiscent of what the British did eventually in the Gulf, and that is Malaysia. You have this bizarre and fascinating unit in the United Nations, which is called the United Arab Emirates. This is technically a republic in the sense that the head of the state is not the king, there isn't one, but there is a president. And this presidency has to be rotated among the various emirs that were brought together to create the United Arab Emirates. It's actually a good idea in some way if you want to stick around, because then no single emir has full power and is not tempted to last for 95 years or whatever it is. And it's very easy for outsiders to come in and plot with people who didn't get to be emir. And the British used the same, it's really the same mechanism that was used in Malaysia. That is, rather than having one king, it was much more clever to have 8 or 9 of them rotating every 4 years and so forth. So everybody would get to be a king, but not too long. And they had very little power. At the same time, the Muslim Malay population, many of them very sort of regionally obsessed. Our sultan, not your goddamn sultan, and so forth. So actually it means that the government of Malaysia can work perfectly happily while making a few noises with regard to the kings, but basically not paying that much attention to them except as a symbol of the rightness of privileges for the Malays against the ghastly Chinese and the even worse Tamils and so forth. But it seems to me it's going to be quite stable because there isn't too many of them, and of these monarchs. And they're not really that important in the end, except sort of psychologically. I don't see any obvious change. The two monarchies which are in trouble for different reasons are Cambodia and Siam. And the crucial thing, of course, is that, in a way, Cambodia is a bit odd, actually. I mean, first of all, Sihanouk created a kind of monarchical absolutism in the 50s and 60s, pretty tyrannical. But he was clever enough to try and keep out of the clutches of South Vietnam and Thailand, and eventually was knocked off by his chief of his army, Lon Nol, when he was out of the country. And you have a military dictatorship that lasted until the fall of Cambodia to the Vietnamese and Khmer Rouge forces. But, and if that had been all that happened, that is, if the Vietnamese and the Cambodians had collaborated and worked together, then it would have been the end of the monarchy, I think. But as you know, they became violently opposed to each other, and the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia, and there were interventions by the United Nations that eventually forced the Vietnamese to move out, go back. And a very shaky interim regime was set up, which has now been consolidated under the 20 years rule of Hun Sen. And one of the terms of agreement, because Conseil also had to participate in how do we sort of pull Cambodia back together after the ghastly rule of the Khmer Rouge. Well, you know, the Cambodians really loved their monarchs and wanted to have a monarch back. And, well, Sihanouk was too old and too cunning to go back, actually. And he was aware that his sons, almost all of them, if they weren't dead, were deadbeat. Really bad people, every single one of them. And so he pointed to his son, Sihamoni, who for years had been living in France as a dancer, a ballet dancer, not a belly dancer, a ballet dancer, and had retired and had his own school of ballet and so perfectly happy in France, but he was summoned back and put in the position of the king, very unwillingly, not least because he much preferred France to Cambodia, and also because everybody knew that he was gay, not married and not going to have any children. So monarchies need to think that they have yet another generation coming, and they're not going to have one coming from Simahoni. And for the Hun Sen, this sad man who does what he's told because he's ruled by his mother, but basically what he said was, I'm going to leave as soon as my father's funeral has been finished, which was early this year. But actually his mother insisted he stays on because nobody else is going to be able to handle this office. So you feel very sad for him. But I think it's very hard to imagine how there will be a king after him. Most likely it will just quietly die away. May not be right, but I think that's most likely solution. There may become, he's popular in the sense that people think he's simple, gentle, nice man, and so forth. So there might be some real popular support for him, especially as more and more people dislike the domineering style of Hun Sen. So that's the shaky one. And the irony of all this is in the 1960s, Sihanouk used to get a lot of popular support. He used to go on the radio quite regularly and complain to listeners on the radio about what a messy family he had. He had this princess, his daughter, who was very beautiful, but is absolutely sex mad. She wants to sleep with every goddamn man she can run into, and it's really terrible and shameful. And I've got this son who is really a girl in a man's body, and this is very shameful for us too. This is the guy who now is the hope of the monarchy. I mean, it's very interesting the way this develops. Okay, finally to the one which the messiest one is the one that's going on in Thailand. A lot of people think, I'm inclined to think that it's near the end. But other people say, no chance. The first thing is to recognize, I mean, if you go to right-wing circles in Bangkok, what you hear is nostalgic ideas about the return to Chakri, that's the dynastic name. It's a whole set of lies that go on in this. And the first one is that there was, in the old days of the absolute monarchy in Thailand, there was never any absolute, as the son will explain very quickly. That's one. And the other one, of course, we stand for the Thai people. This is a dynasty which is more than 50% DNA is Chinese. But you're not allowed to say that. We have documents signed by the rulers in the 19th century right up into the 1980s where the stamp is a seal stamp with the clan name Ma on them. But in the early 20th century, this was scrubbed, so you don't actually see it. The first crucial thing is to tear apart the whole idea that this was ever a kind of Louis XIV or Frederick the Great or Tsarina Catherine or anything like that. Not at all. The first thing is that the Chakri rulers in the up till now, really, well, let's say at least up to World War II, didn't have any real army at all that would make any sense. And as things developed, they tried to create a kind of military force that is where the armies of Louis XIV, as we say. The first thing that happened is that the army starts to turn against the monarchy, and you have a rebellion already in 1911 and another one in 1932, which eventually forced the ruler of the time to abdicate and live in England. And the reason for this is that the British armadas, or the fleets in Burma and so forth, could intimidate these people very easily and quickly. And when the British insisted on enforcing free trade, it's the famous Pact of 1855, where the British diplomat, John Bowring, simply said, you have to open all your ports and everything else. No more royal monopolies. Has to be full free trade, except for one thing. You and me will make sure that the opium belongs to the royalty. So the survivor of the old system was really only the drug trade. I love this man because he had created this absolutely sublime motto for the 19th century. And he actually wrote down, Jesus Christ is free trade. And free trade is, can you guess? Jesus Christ. Amazing. Karl Marx noticed this and said this man was a shameless hypocrite, which is actually perfectly correct. So here, half the budget of the Rama V, 6th, 7th, and so forth, all came from the profits of the drug trade, which was controlled by the royal house. So you can't imagine Louis XIV running his empire on drugs. Something like 80% of the import-export trade for a long time, really up until World War II, was controlled by the British. Foreign policy of the British had to be followed, and the royal ministers and so forth decided that Britain was more powerful than the French, and Britain would protect them from expansion by the French in Indochina. But actually, when the French seized the left-hand bank of the Mekong, the British said, oh, that's all right, why not? It's not a big deal. And the British took the opportunity to take into Malaysia, as it were, some of the former tributary rajas in the northern part of Malaysia. So the absolutist monarch had to swallow all of this. And the worst thing that he had to swallow was that extraterritorial rights. That is, no foreigners could be tried under Thai law. Not one. And indeed, Thais who registered themselves as employees of French or Japanese or British, whatever it is, also could not be tried under extraterritoriality. And this privilege only disappeared in in the late 1930s, when the anti-monarchical coup d'etat group managed to negotiate this with the British. So the first thing is that this idea of we could return to the absolute state is absolutely laughable when you actually look at it. The bureaucracy was full of literally hundreds of foreign people, mostly British, who basically told this is what your economic policy has to be, this is this, and so forth. And it was a protectorate, it's very clearly a protectorate by all the other comparisons with protectorates elsewhere. And of course, Thailand did not have oil. It didn't have large quantities of tin or anything else. There was nothing much that Thai really offered to the economically, except rice trade and some hardwood trade. And the British was more interested in Burma, which had lots of oil, and so forth and so forth. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is this. There's a question, of course, of all monarchies, where succession is a very important, always a very important question. And in the Muslim style of rulership, where there's lots of wives and lots of different kinds of kids, the problem is how to choose one of those children without them killing each other. And actually, in the old days of Southeast Asian mainland monarchies, often very bloody because, you know, brother so-and-so and killed his half-brother and so forth in competition for this position. Rama V decided to try to avoid this by using British law, saying that his successor should be his eldest son by the highest of his wives. And this wife was actually his own half-sister. Well, having made this decision, of course, he ran into the obvious trouble, which was that Rama VI was gay and refused to get married until a few months before he actually died. It's very unlikely that the son that was actually produced by him, more likely by one of his favorite male friends. And this has been consistent so that the king is officially only has one wife, and I think that probably maybe he has something on the side, but basically, I mean, he stands up as a kind of European-style ruler. But he was forced to marry his first cousin, not a very good idea. And what he's faced now is the difficulty in which everybody's aware of. He has been in hospital constantly for the last 3 years. His wife has had a complete vegetable for a year now in another hospital, apparently not recognizing anybody. And the son is absolutely hopeless. Everybody in the country who has a cell phone has seen the pictures he took of his third wife, stark naked, in a birthday party for him. It was leaked into the cell phone system. So can you imagine? I mean, everybody has seen what maybe the next queen has between her legs. It's not a good start, obviously. And then, you know, the most popular of the daughters, who some people think should be the real successor. Look at Elizabeth, she could do it too. But unfortunately, she is a very active lesbian, and is not likely to have any children. In fact, she's almost over the age. And then the eldest sister married a foreigner, which was really bad, and now she tries to be a sort of elderly Princess Diana on TV, in movies and TV shows. And the last one is nothing. I mean, it's of no significance at all. So it really is a question, where are they going to find a believable monarch? And the king has never solved the problem, what to do about this. And I think that if the bad guy, the bad boy, becomes the king, I think all hell will come loose. And it's too embarrassing and too shaming, and then the women, of course, for various reasons, are unacceptable. And there's nobody else close by because of the single family, nuclear family. It's probable that by accident he shot his elder brother to death in 1946. Kids were playing with their guns in the palace. But they were only 2 children, 3 children, and his sister is already dead. So where to go? So I think this is the most unstable of all the monarchies, actually, in Southeast Asia. The next is Cambodia, then Brunei, and then Malaysia. That's what I think of as the order of instability to stability. But all of it hangs on the residues of the British global naval and communications ambitions and successes. Not nice, but there it is. You have to understand it. I mean, even in a curious way, what happened in Cambodia and Vietnam is Napoleon III idea. Oh, I can learn from the British. Because otherwise, in other parts, the French don't do that kind of thing, but in that places they do. Sorry, I've run over time a bit, but it's a complicated situation, and I have to confess that I'm a Republican, not a GOP one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have time for question, so maybe come to the microphone. Yeah. Ed and Judith.
Eduardo Taden from University of the Philippines. Thank you very much, Ben, for your usually enthralling presentation, as usual, which I've gotten used to all these years, and still come up with unexpected brilliances. I have 2 comments, actually. It's all about the comedy and tragedy of royalty. I was wondering whether we could also move away from the nation-state paradigm and looking at royalty in Southeast Asia, and for which one can probably discover certain kingdoms that existed before nation-states came into being in Southeast Asia. And the one that immediately comes to mind is the Sultanate of Sulu in Mindanao, which during its heyday was on an equal status with the Sultanate of Brunei. As a matter of fact, the 2 were allies. And at one point, the Sultan of Sulu helped quell a rebellion in Brunei, and for which Sultan of Brunei awarded North Borneo, now known as Sabah, to the Sultanate of Sulu. And unfortunately, the British stepped in and did a bit of a favor to the Sultanate of Sulu and entered into an agreement. So that's something, outside of the nation-state paradigm in looking at kingdoms and royalties in Southeast Asia. I don't know much about the Sultanate of Yogyakarta, so perhaps something can also be said about that. So that's the, but this also brings me to, you have a list of the richest royals, and Thailand and Brunei leads the pack in Southeast Asia and the world. But what about also a list of the poorest royals, those who are now living in absolute poverty? And again, the Sultanate of Sulu comes to mind, because not only has it lost the kingdoms, the lands, the resources that it once had, it now has to subsist on the $200 a year being paid by Malaysia to the Sultanate, which was a carryover from the treaty between the British and the Sultanate of Sulu. And the sad fact is that there are 4 claimants to the throne. So that that is a comedy that has now become a tragedy, unfortunately.
It's true. There's still lots of little tiny monarchs like in Georgia and so forth, but this is not at the national level. They have a special, it's a bit like, I mean, Georgia looks a bit like, shall we say, what's the southernmost Malaysian state? Johor. Except that the Sultan will never get rotated to be the president of Indonesia. I mean, in India, there are still people who call themselves Raja and so forth, but they have no access to the apex of national power. So I don't think this is and this business about, who gives land to who in the pre-nation state, I mean, you have to give land either to get the right woman you want to be your queen, or you are scared of the guy, so, okay, you take care of this and I will retreat. But with the idea that, another 20 years will take it all back. The condition of pre-nation state situation is that all borders are temporary. Anytime somebody can come and grab a whole piece of your country, or you will lose your own, you have to move here and there and there. You watch the maps of Europe, for example, from 1600 until 1900. Every 25 years, the map looks quite different. The crucial thing about what the League of Nations began and has been put in cement by the United Nations is that no more annexations, no more conquests. Everybody has to stick by the land situation that exists there. There has been no successful long-term occupation and annexation of anywhere in the world. I mean, even Suharto had to give up East Timor, and Israeli annexations have never been recognized by the UN and never will be, in my view. So this is an enormous benefit to small monarchies. They don't have to live in fear in the way that they would have had to done before. And so in a way, the national territory becomes stable, and because it's stable, it can get to be kind of almost magical. This is our country. Look at the boundaries. Nobody else can do this except us. I mean, a sort of sanctification of specific terrains. I'll give you a lovely example of this, which always makes my behind fall off. I used to ask my students in America about, we were discussing at that time, there was a huge debt from the Americans to the Japanese, and people were frustrated about this and what's going on. And so just as deadpan as I could imagine, I said, well, what we should do in order to solve this problem, get rid of all this huge amount of debt, why don't we just sell Alaska to the Japanese? What? I said, yeah, you bought it. In the time of Lincoln, you talked to the Tsar of Russia was having financial problems, and you just bought it from him. I don't see why, if America's in such this, it's easy to do. You just sell it tomorrow, it'll be all right. And the absolute angry and stammer, how could you do that? Alaska is America. It become magically sancted. And you can't take it away from us. It's where we belong. And you look at the map, my God. And then look at the stuff up on the other end of Canada, and then, Hawaii, which is, 6 hours away from, I mean, it's grotesque, but that's what happens. That conquests stabilize as sacred ground. And that's an important part of the kings don't have to conquer anymore because they're not going to be allowed to conquer anymore. And so they appear as more peaceful than they used to be. But probably for that reason, they're often worse to their own public than they used to be in the old days when you go off and attack or destroy other people's empires or kingdoms.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Shall I go on? Shall I go ahead? Well, I think that was a dastardly clever question to ask, insidiously clever, because most people don't think about royalty beyond Hello Magazine or whatever it is they read on the plane. But you showed very well, you illustrated what royalty doesn't have today, which is much support from their people, credible genealogies, or even any military support. So what do they have? And you showed very well, it's still on the board, that they have a lot of wealth. So what does that make them? Does that make them part of a global class of some kind, with a special status group, a status group class together? I mean, your Bangkok Post picture suggested that they're just like any other class celebrities, all needing each other. They need to be seen together. They need each other's support, or they wouldn't be worth anything. Why did the Thai king want to be photographed with all the other royals? Because they need each other too, to show we're one of the club. And they marry each other too, most of the time, when they can produce heirs. So that seems to be their main raison d'être. It's like a glorified global status group, the gratin de la société, or whatever it is. But they're also, because of their wealth, many of them are involved in business. We know that. So you could say they're a super laundered business class too. And then that's where a lot of their power really lies, not in the military or their genealogy or the rest. And so I'd like to ask you, do you think that the Thai and the Malaysian kings represent this sort of characteristic of royals? I mean, you singled them out, and they do seem to fit this. Otherwise, why would the Malaysian sultans want to be photographed with the British anymore, or with with the Japanese, with whom they were at war a couple of generations ago? I mean, what is it? Are they above it all? Are they some kind of special class in this? Even Sihanouk used to be part of the group. I don't know. Those are just general questions as to what they represent in a global sense, that they can be supported by the UN, by world society, garner all this wealth somehow and manage to use it for their own status. Is that all that's left?
Well, I mean, this is the impact of mass media is also very interesting now, because in the old days, and that's why King Michael, King Constantine, King and so forth. I mean, you had to be married to other royalties, but this after World War II has collapsed. And what you find, for example, if you look at this Damkedu, who's going to be Elizabeth's successor, I assume, at some point, and he's married a commoner. The new king, just starting now, of Holland, has a Catholic wife who is the daughter of one of the worst killers in the Argentine period of repression in the 60s and 70s, when lots and lots of people were murdered and thrown into the ocean tortured and thrown into the ocean from airplanes and so forth. There she is. She's quite cute. She looks okay. The idea that you could have a Catholic queen was unthinkable before. But anyway, this dynasty is only, how much? It's not even, it's barely 200 years old, nothing. Same way in Sweden now, and in Norway, the coming up, marrying, one is the girl, one of the princesses is marrying a, what's the kind of guy you called who does hairdos? Coiffeur, yeah. And another one has married a TV sort of actress and so forth. So this whole idea that there's a kind of holy blood right, and that the kings are of different kinds of people than everybody else, that is actually disappearing almost completely. And this is also making for an interesting problem, which Diana actually worked to the first upon, because the less people take that you are some kind of sacred blood, so you don't even enjoy that privilege. But also the everyday life of monarchs is quite boring. I mean, it's an endless row of exhibitions, of charity things, of ceremonial and so forth. I mean, how is anybody going to have any fun? So she started to create, I mean, she wouldn't have said this, but what she wanted to be was a celeb, celebrity. But she couldn't be a celebrity without being married to the Crown Prince. And she wasn't that pretty and she wasn't that intelligent. But she knew how to work the two systems. And that is, she could be a royal and also be a celebrity. Now, her sex life could be okay for a celebrity. You expect movie stars and so forth to have lots of affairs and so forth, but it doesn't work for, especially for a woman, royalty. You're not supposed to do that kind of thing. And then what happens to her when she's 35, 40? She's still going to be able to be a celeb. Celebs don't last long. But you can see in Bangkok, too, that the eldest princess really thinks that it's too boring for words to be a princess. I'll stay a princess, but I want to be on TV, I want to dance this, and I want to show this and all that. She wants to be a celeb. So television actually, in the end, will turn all these people into, celebs. And, you know, it's mockery. I mean, if you want to really put kingship up there, you've got to be a little bit mysterious. You've got to be, you know, impressive in some way. And, you know, coming onto a TV show in your underwear is not going to work. And, you know.
Yes. Thank you for your very enjoyable talk. I have a comment and followed by a question. This concerns one of those stable monarchies you referred to in Southeast Asia, Brunei. And perhaps Malaysia to some extent. And that is, I don't think you mentioned the role of Singapore as a useful successor to the British in Southeast Asia, to the extent that, let's stick to Brunei in particular, that the Brunei monarchy has a very close, or the Brunei state and its monarch have a very close relationship, a very stable and tight relationship with Singapore, both financial, military, so on and so forth. So my question is, don't you think that one of the reasons this particular monarchy has personally I think a long future, is that its future is very closely tied to that of Singapore, which also has a long future. And is also, by the way, some kind of a modern monarchy, you know, for the last half century. Singapore. My question is, do you think that Brunei's monarchy does rely to some extent on that support from Singapore?
In this day and age, I mean, I know he has all these good connections with, but he's not a fool. I mean, this guy's not going to depend on one place, and he doesn't know what's going to happen when Lee Kuan Yew finally goes down to hell. I have no idea what will happen next, and you can't be relied upon. Singaporeans are notoriously opportunist in the external politics. Now I think that he's going to depend on support in the Muslim world, and also Britain and America. They don't want any. And he's in the UN. I mean, messing up is not going to be easy. The likeliest thing of trouble would be his brother. I mean, the internal family conflicts. I mean, he's now turned over the realm to one of his sons. Whether that will stick, we don't know. That's the problem. I mean, polygamy is good for creating lots of possible candidates, as opposed to primogeniture. On the other hand, primogeniture you end up with nothing except idiots and gays and God knows what. At the same time, they're not going to kill each other. But the polygamous children, yes, there's a good chance of it.
Thank you.
Still have time for a question?
Hi, Professor Anderson. I personally don't have a lot of knowledge about monarchies in Southeast Asia, but from your talk, the topic of the course, the talk is why do monarchies still survive in Southeast Asia? So it occurs to me that an implicit assumption is that monarchy in Southeast Asia somehow are near the end. And the crisis of succession that you gave of the example of Thailand, for example, seems to support that assumption. So I just want to ask, what is your assessment of the assumption that isn't monarchy in South Asia near the end? And if so, what would follow or what would happen?
I forgot to add one other thing, which is really quite crucial to the modern history of monarchs, and that is that beginning in the colossal crash of World War I, it became more and more obvious to anybody who was a monarch that if they were pulled down, if they were kicked out or anything, there would be no replacement for it. And, you know, really aggressive, power-hungry people like, for example, Black Pihun Songkram. I mean, a century earlier, he would have started a new dynasty. And you can look at a lot of these places. Once the king goes, the general or whoever it happens to be, in the 19th century, would have started a new dynasty, but it's no longer possible. So everybody knows if you have a royal house now, it's the last. And in some ways, that's a power to the existing monarchies. You know, if you get rid of me, then you'll have nothing. And that's an important factor. I mean, in Thailand, people say, well, you know, but if we don't, there's nobody else. What are we going to do? And you say, well, it's time to change, right? But why don't you start a new dynasty in Thailand with a bit more energy and a bit more imagination than the existing one? What? What? I mean, it's amazing. It's like the response to, you know, why not sell Alaska to the Japanese? I mean, absolute. I don't get it. It's impossible. But that's generally the shape everywhere. If you take the case of Bangui in Africa, this guy, there's never been a king, an emperor of that area, but he decides I want to be, and he lasts, you know, less than a year. That's not going to work. So I don't think that. I mean, that's what worries the right wingers, which is that the regime, they would like, I think, to have a different family in power, but it's not possible. Once it's gone, it's gone. I mean, you look at what happened in Nepal, where this bizarre son shot everybody in his family and killed them and killed himself, maybe, or he was murdered. I mean, once it's gone, it's gone. It's not going to come back in Nepal.
University of the Philippines, Diliman. I'm just curious, in Thailand, with the yellow shirt, red shirt divide, what is the sentiment with the red shirts? Consist of Thaksin and pro-Thaksin and not Thaksin supporters on keeping the monarchy?
No, I think this is a tactic of Thaksin, not to attack the monarchy directly. So, of course, in this, but of course, I mean, he knows that the king is, you know, will die very soon, and I mean, he's a skillful politician, and he has been hurt badly by the right-wingers, and so I think he's not going to be very nice to the family if and when he comes back. I mean, you know, once you're in power, if he gets back into power, all kinds of ways to cut down the monarchy, you know, different kinds of propaganda on the television, doing this, that, and the other. And this is what really is fragile for the monarchy in our time of the internet and so forth. I mean, they closed down something like 50 or 60,000 websites in the last 3 or 4 years to stop anti-monarchy stuff. But it's hopeless. They can't manage it. And, you know, there are places that you can get these radio programs where they talk about the second princess, they called her Mr. Tom, which is the slang for lesbian, and then make fun of her and so forth. And there are all kinds of slang expressions for the king and the queen, which are not complimentary. And there's not much they can do about that. I mean, what they have tried to do is to give these amazing, it's got the most serious anti-lèse majesté laws anywhere in the world, as far as I know. I mean, you can go to jail for 20 years for writing a couple of sentences which are not complimentary to the king. But if you do a couple of murders, you'll be out with it. You will be sentenced for 8 years and you'll be out in 4. So there's really a panic inside the royal, because they never expected that they would lose control of the mass media with the social media that are really important. And that's what they hadn't built on. They thought that they put up enough billboards and PR television at ceremonies was enough to keep the thing going. No, it doesn't.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. I'm interested in your preliminary observation on the gendering of monarchies. Just want to read my notes here. The monarchies you mentioned are all, who are headed by women, are all in northwestern Europe. It seems that women leaders in Asia are more successful in formal electoral democracies in assuming power. And so I was wondering what your reading of this in terms of the role of women within Asian monarchies, in that they augur well with values of gender role complementarity, or a particular unique consolidation of monarchical patriarchies, or because we have not seen a crisis in succession as in the northwestern European countries where there are queens. And would there be possibilities for Thailand and Cambodia to see the ascendance of Asian queens? Not that we don't have Asian queens in other sectors in Asian society.
What you can have is a regent. I think that Sianomi could turn, she's very old, but I mean his mother could be the regent. But the regent is always a replacement for the king on a temporary basis. And I can't imagine any country that I can think of where you would get a woman, you know, say 35 years old, 40 years old, and so forth. I can't see any place where this happened, unless in Thailand the army decides they can't stand the king, the new king, and they want to find somebody who is popular, which she is, and they might put her in as the, I mean, legally under the law, she is the only one of the girls who is in legally allowed to become the new monarch. But, you know, it's not very easy to have a heavily overweight lesbian as the new queen. We'll see. And the British already had the first, as far as I know, the first lesbian queen, Queen Anne, at the beginning of the 18th century. And the problem with her, of course, is she wasn't going to have any children, so end of the dynasty. No, we don't want lesbians. We may like them, but they're not doing what they're supposed to do, which is to continue the line. So I don't know what will happen. A lot will turn on what the army decides when the thing comes to an end. I mean, it's one reason why people want to see all the babies in of princes when they marry. It's a big deal. Why do all women love to watch this? And why are they interested? It's just another baby looking like any other baby. It's this fantasy about royalty's future and so forth and so forth. It's sort of, soap opera in a way. I mean, not serious at all. But then I'm very prejudiced.
Yeah.
Everybody, I think, wants to ask this question, these kind of people. This $30 billion the King of Thailand, it's not all from drug money. What's the origin of this fortune?
No, the drug thing came to an end. It was taken over by the police and the military, not the royal house. No, it came basically about monopoly, and initially the monopoly of cement. Nobody else was allowed to. It started in the 20s, I think, and run by a very tough Danish company, which was a way of escaping from the British, if possible. They made a lot of money out of that. And then they had a whole set of financial advisors after the crash of 1930 to build up this with investments overseas, in London particularly, but some in Hong Kong and everywhere. I mean, this money comes from what he's been in power for. It's almost 70 years. And he's notoriously stingy. I mean, he announces every so often these royal programs for everybody, but actually he didn't pay anything to them. It comes out of the taxes. I mean, I think that this a grotesque 30 billion for what? He's going to be dead, in a year or two. What's he going to do? The sun is certainly going to use as much of it as possible. It's just insecurity. I have to have more money, I have to have more money, I have to have more money. But the interesting thing is that, again, I don't notice you shouldn't focus only on this. The fascinating thing that is of the European monarchs, I mean, not even kings. There's a little prince in Monaco and a little, in Liechtenstein. And these are nothing but, crooked politicians overseas, gun runners. Everybody is stashing their money there, and they just sit tight and collect, Nobody else can do that. It's the advantage of being very small. If there was one big power controlling all the oil in the Gulf, there would be lots of reasons to push him around. But there's a whole bunch of small ones. That's okay. You can manage it.
Thank you.
Can I add one note of gossip, which will delight you? I just found out from a friend of mine, she's a Palestinian girl who works in doing research in Morocco, and she said that everybody's all agog because the young king got a new boyfriend who is the son of the long-standing political tyrant of Gabon. And this guy is very handsome, very typical black, strong guy. And so you have the sort of sort of going back to the times of before nations, that is, you marry between different dynastics. Kind of nice, it's a change from the usual stories. Good. Okay.
Thank you.